risks the likes of which the financing world had never before seen. That the wool on the connection between borrowers and lenders in quite that were too dangerous. That wasn't even in their frame of reference, or as were truly dangerous. The Fortune magazine after it was all over. I wasn't out to invent the biggest floating grapes game of all time, but that's what happened. It was late to 1917 years. The baby boom generation was growing up. Boomers were going to own their own homes, just like their parents, but given their vast number. There were 66 million births between, and many economics worried that there couldn't be enough capital to fund the mortgage. This worry was exacerbated by the fact that main private mortgage, the saving and loan-driven industry, was terrible straits. The trips financed their loans be offered in depositor saving accounts, which paid an interest rate set below up 5.3%. Yet, because the late 1917 years old was also a time of high inflation and double-digit interest rates, customers were moving their money out of S&Ls and into new vehicles like money market funds, which made much higher interest. The trades were becoming destabilized. Rainieri would later recall the funding mechanics was broken. Besides, the mortgage market was highly inefficient. In certain areas in the country, at certain times, there might be a shortage of funds. In other places and at other times, there might be a surplus. There was no mechanism for tapping into a broader pool of funds, as Tika Pratt, the former chairman of the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, once told Congress. It is the largest capital market in the world virtually, and it is a one which was sheltered from the normal process on the capital markets. In the theory, at the last putting capital to its most efficient use was Wall Street did. The story, as it would later be told, is that Rainieri and Fink succeeded by inventing to the process of securitization, a process that would become so commonplace on Wall Street that in time it was to be used to bundle not just mortgage, but auto loans, credit card loans, commercial loans, you name it, Rainieri named the process securitization. Because, as he described at the time, it was a technology that in its essence enabled use to convert a mortgage into a bond. That is, a security. Fink developed a key technique called tracing, which allowed the securitizer to carve up a mortgage bond into pieces, according to the different risks entailed, so that it could piece to investors who had to appetite for those particular risks. The cash flow from the mortgage were meted accordingly. The truth is told that the creation for the mortgage-backed securities was never something Wall Street did entirely on its own. As clever and driven and Fink and Rainieri were, They would never have to said its government hadn't paved to the way, shaking laws for the instant that stood in the way of the news market. More important, they couldn't have done it without the involvement of Fannie Mae and his sibling, Freddie Mac, the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, the complicated interplay that involved between Wall Street and these two strange companies. A storied alliance of feuds, of dependence and resentments, gave rise to a mortgage-backed securities market that was far from dysfunctional than anyone realized at the time. And out of the diffusion grew the beginning and the crisis of 28 years. Almost since the phrase "the American Dream" was coined in the early 1930s years, it has been synonymous with homeownership in a way that isn't true in most other countries. However, ship is something that the vast majority of Americans aspire to. It suggests outward mobility, opportunity, and stake in something that matters. Historically, owning a home hasn't just been about taking possession of a precious asset, or even having a roof over one's head. It has also been a statement about values. Not surprisingly, government policy has long encouraged homeownership. The home mortgage interest deduction is a classic example. So is the 30-year fixed mortgage, which is standard in only one other country, Denmark, and is designed to allow middle-class families to afford monthly mortgage payments for decades. Federal law gave the S&Ls industry a small interest rate advantage over the banking industry. The housing differential disadvantage was called. All of these policies had outwardly bipartisan support. Criticizing them was political heresy. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were also important agents of government. However, cheap policy. They, too, were insulted from criticism. Fannie Mae, the older of the two, was born during the Great Depression. Its original role was to void out mortgage that the Veterans Administration and the Federal Housing Administration were writing, thus freeing up capital to allow for more government-insured loans to be made. In 1968, Fannie was split into the two companies, one nicknamed Ginnie Mae, continuing buying government-insured loans and remain firmly a part of the government. Fannie, however, was allowed to do several new things. It was allowed to buy conventional mortgage, one that had not been insured in the government. It thus was allowed to issue security package for mortgage is cat warranted. In the process, Fannie became a very old creature, half government enterprise. It had a vaguely defined social mandate from Congress to make housing more available to low and the middle incomes Americans. Half private enterprise. It has shareholders and board and director, and the structure of typical corporation. At about the same time, Congress created Freddie Mac to buy up mortgages from the thrift industry. Again, the idea was these purchases will free up capital, allowing the LSLs to make more mortgage. Until to 1989 years, when Freddie Mac joined a Fannie Mae and publicly traded company. Freddie was actually owned by the trade industry and was overseen by the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, which regulated the LSL. People in Washington called Fannie and Freddie's the GCS, which stood for the government-sponsored enterprise. Here's a surprising fact. It was the government, not Wall Street, that first securities modern mortgage. Ginnie Mae came first, selling securities beginning in the 1907 years old. That's the consisting of the FFA and the PA loans, and the warranting the payment of the principal and interest. A year later, Freddie Mac used the first mortgage-backed security, using a conventional mortgage. Also, with a principal and interest warranted, is doing so it was taken on the risk that the borrower might default, while transferring these interest rates risks from the market in the securities. Volume growing slowly. It was not a huge success. Took a 30-year fixed mortgage meant simple to a borrower mortgage come full on the compare risks for the investors. 30 years, after all, is a long time. In the space of the 3 decades, not only is it likely that interest rates will change, but who knows? The borrowers might fall on hard times and default. In addition, mortgage come with something called prepayment risks, because borrowers have the right to prepare their mortgage. Investors can be sure the cash flow for the mortgage will stay at the level they were expecting. The prepayment risk diminishes the value of the bond. Ginnie and Freddie Securities removed the default risks, but did nothing about any of these other risks. They simply distributed the cash flows from the pool and the mortgage on the pro rate basis. Whatever happened after that, well, that was the investor problem. When Wall Street got into the act, it focused on the devising securities that would appeal to a much broader group of investors and create far more demand than a Ginnie or Freddie bond. Part of the answer came from tracing, carving up the bond according to the different kinds of risks. Investors found this appealing because different strains could be jiggered to meet the particular needs of different investors. For instance, you could create what came to be known as stripped securities. One strip pays only interest, another only principal. Is interest rate decline, everyone refinanced. The interest only strip could be worthless. But if rate rose, investor will make a nice profit. Sure enough, parceling out risk is the fashion. Give mortgage-backed securities enormous appeal to a wide variety of investors. From standing the start in the late 1970 years old, bonds created from mortgage on single-family home rate to make to by 1981 years old, according to a report by the Securities and Exchange Commission. By the end of 21 years, that number had risen to 3.3 trillion. Trenching was also good for Wall Street. because the friends underwriting the mortgage-backed bonds could seal the various pieces for the more money than the sum on the wall, and bankers could extract rich fix. Plus, of course, Wall Street could make money from trading the new securities. By the 1983 years, according to the Business Week, Raineri's Mortgage Finances Group and the Salomon Brothers account for the close to half of Salomon's at million in a profit, along with Young Fund bonds. Mortgage-backed bonds became a defining feature on the 1918 years old financial market. Trenching, however, was not the only necessary ingredient. A second important factor was the involvement in the credit rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and later Fitch Rating. Raineri pushed hard to get the rating agencies involved because he realized the investors were never going to be comfortable with, or, to be blunt, willing to work hard enough to understand the intricacies on the hundreds and the thousands on the mortgage inside each security. People didn't even know what the average length of the mortgage was. Raineri would later recall, you needed to impose structures that were relatively simple for investors to understand so that they didn't have to become mortgage experts. Inventors understood what rating meant, and Congress and the regulators placed such trust in the rating agencies that they had designed them a nationally recognized statistical rating organizations, ONNRSOS. Among other things, the law allowed investors who weren't supposed to take much risk, like pension funds, to invest in certain securities if they had a high enough rating. Up until then, the rating agencies had built the business entirely around corporate bonds, rating them on a scale from AAA, and all the way to the default. At first, they resisted rating these nice bonds, but they eventually came around as they realized the amounts in rating mortgage-backed securities could be a good secondary business, especially as the volume grew very quickly. They become an integral part of the process, and so-called structured finance became a key source of profit to the rating agencies. And the third thing Raineri and Finks needed in order to make mortgage-backed securities appealing to investors, they needed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And around the same time, Raineri and Fink were trying to figure out how to make mortgage-backed securities work. Fannie Mae was going broke. It was losing $1 million, and they rushing toward a collapse that could have been one of the most disastrous in modern history. As the Washington Post later put it, an interest rate scored state. Fannie found itself in the same kind of trouble as many of the treats, and for the same reason, unlike Freddie Mac, which had offloaded the interest rates to investors, Fannie Mae had kept to the 30-year fixed rate mortgage in vogue on its books. Now it was chunking on the mortgage. Things got so bad that it had a month to go, sharp measuring how long it could survive the interest rates didn't decline. It had even devised a plan to call on the Federal Reserve to save if the banks stopped lending in the money. Two things saved Fannie Mae. First, The banks never did stop lending and the money. Why? Because their working assumption was the funny mice status as a government-sponsored enterprise with its central role in making 30-year mortgage possible for the middle-class Americans, mean that the federal government would always be there to bail it out if ever got into the serious trouble. Although there was nothing in the statute privatizing Fannie made the state this explicitly. And Fannie executives would spend decades coldly denying that they had a spoken government safety net. That's what everyone believed over time. Fannie Mae's implies government guarantee, as it came to be called, became a critical source of its power and success. Like Hunter, Maxwell had once been a Republican, a Philadelphia native. He graduated from Yale, where he was a champion tennis player, and then Harvard, where he studied law, before joining the Nixon administration and general counsel of Hope. When he was approached to run Fannie, he was living in California, running a mortgage insurance company called Ticker Mortgage, and he did converted to the Democratic Party because he felt that in California that was the only way to have any influence. I was a businessman, Maxwell says now. A businessman was exactly what a Fannie Mae needed. Jim Johnson, the Democratic power broker who succeeded Maxwell and Fannie CEO in the 19 years old, would later say they established the company as long-term funds in housing financing. Judy Kennedy is affordable housing advocate who worked for Freddie Mac as a lobbyist in the late 1980s years old, puts it more gently. She calls Maxwell a transformative figure. Maxwell was gracious and charming, the sort of man who sent handwritten notes, opening his office door to the employees, and took books and books, waiting him to read on vacation. But he was also incredible, took, with blue eyes that could turn steely cold. He didn't tolerate mediocrity. He couldn't afford to. He was fighting for the survival of their company, and anyone, no matter what level, who was not up to the task left, or were scared to leave, says William Maloney, who spent 2 decades as Fannie chief lobbyist. During Maxwell's 10-year reign, Fannie had 4 presidents and burning through lower-level executives. When Maxwell retired, the company head and the commission made a video that showed corporate cars moving in and out of Fannie's office with body bags in the trunks. Also, like Rainieri, Maxwell saw how critical mortgage-backed securities were to the future on the housing market, and to his company bottom line for Fannie, selling mortgage-backed securities was a way not only to get rid of in-out books, but to earn big fees. Mortgage-backed securities represented an opportunity for Fannie to become even more central to the housing market that already was, because the HCS were the natural middleman between mortgage holders and Wall Street. Is Fannie grabbed hold on the role and keep it for itself, a profitable future we assert. In public settings, Rainieri and Maxwell were generous in their praise for each other. I think he is a genius, synonymous with a Wall Street entrance into mortgage financing. Maxwell told a thousand of saving and loans executives in 1918 for years. David is as much as I understood the implication on the what I was trying to do, said Ranieri today. He was my ally. We needed them and they needed us. But under the surface, it was always an unity alliance. Ranieri was part of Wall Street. No one on the street wanted to set, who showed possible profit to the HCS. David and I joked, Ranieri acknowledged. The intellectual argument was what should the government do? Well, should it be allowed to win out? A person close to Ranieri put it more bluntly. Despite his alliance with Fannie and Freddie, Ranieri was against them. He wanted Fannie and Freddie to have a best junior role. Maxwell wanted to prevent Wall Street from shooting Fannie Mae and overwhelmed to establish the primacy of the HCS in the new market. For all the noble talk about helping people buy homes, he inside was really a fight about money and power. What made Fannie and Freddie indispensable in the new mortgage market was one simple fact: the mortgage they guaranteed with the only mortgage investors wanted to buy. After all, the HCS warranty meant that the investors no longer had to worry about the risk that homeowner would default because Fannie and Freddie were assuming that risk. For some investors, HCS-backed paper was the only type of mortgage they were even allowed to buy. In many states, it was against the law for pension funds to purchase private mortgage-backed, but it was perfectly okay for them then the most mortgage security backed by the HCS because those were treated like obligations from the government state. Meanwhile, blue sky laws designed to prevent investment fraud. Meaning that Wall Street firms had to register with each of the 50 states to sell mortgage-backed deals, a process they have to repeat on every single deal. Mortgage-backed securities issued by the HCS were exempt from the blue sky laws in 1917 years. It was on the earliest efforts to put together a mortgage-backed securities deal. Salomon Brothers developed a bond made up of Bank of America mortgage. It was a bust. After that, almost all the early deals were ones in which Fannie and Freddie were the actual issuers of the mortgage-backed securities, while Wall Street was essentially to marketer. Even before the advantage of the mortgage-backed security, Fannie and Freddie had the reputation of being difficult, prickly, and willing to throw their way around at senior level. They couldn't be shut on the market because they were the market. By the June the 1983, the government agencies has used almost $1 billion in mortgage-backed securities, while the purely private sector has used $10 billion. That the same year, Larry Fink and the First Boston pioneered the very first so-called collateralized mortgage obligation, or CMEO, a mortgage-backed security with the three radically different traits: one with short-term 5-year debt, a second with medium, third 12-year debt, and third with long, their 30-year debt. But as usual, the actual issuer of the mortgage wasn't First Boston. It was Freddie Mac. They, the HCS, were the enable, Rainieri Wood later explained. Could get that done was to go to Washington and get some laws changed, and that was he would do. Thus began that the quiet war between Lau, Rainieri and David Madwell. Rainieri had strong ties to Reagan administration and knew he would find a receptive audience there. Like every president, Ronald Reagan professed to stand squarely on the side of the American homeowner. But David Stockman, his budget director, Larry Kudlow, one Stockman carried the booties, and a handful of the others didn't believe that the howardship was necessarily synonymous with Fannie Mae. In particular, they didn't like the implied the government guarantee. When Rainieri helped, the administration drafted a bill to put Wall Street on a more equal footing with the HCS. It was called the secondary mortgage enchantment. Although those in the know always use the slightly slippery sounding acronym when the next target is SMMEA. Rainieri had another name for it: the Private Sector Assistance Bill. Failure to pass it. He warned Congress would risk turning to the mortgage market and America into a totally government franchise. Rainieri was in Reagan's office when the act was signed into law in October 1918 for years.